All right, good evening. We have a little bit of a different night because a couple of different reasons, but we have quite a few people out. They probably took the word that I gave about if during exam time, might as well you can take a week, obviously, and study and you know prepare rightly. So, but we also have a few out of town, different going on different things. No music tonight because couple of them could be here, and I didn't want to throw it on Rose last minute, and kind of wanted us to also enjoy giving them a break for a week. So, but yeah, we're definitely gonna get them incorporated even more as we go forward. All right. So tonight, what we're gonna do two things. We're gonna do one, a quick group discussion, so like you'll kind of divide out into like 3 or 4 people around you, and then after that, we'll do a message, and then we'll be done by 7:30. All right. So that's kind of tonight. Next week, we'll hopefully kind of be back to more of a normal week in here. All right. Sound good? So the discussion I want you to discuss on tonight, it's not a talking point. So usually we have Felipe up here. We kind of have the cards kind of go through. We're going to do something a little different with this week, which is here's what I want you to discuss. I want you to discuss how can we as the View practically reach college or career students around us. So as a minister of this group, one of the things that I want to see is that we would take hold of what we have now, and that we would be reaching people. We would be growing, and that we'd be effective in building connections with other students or in the workplace, one of the two. So I'd like to kind of have y'all discuss for a little bit, and then I'd like to hear feedback about, hey, how can we reach people around us, our age, who we're around, those kind of things. How can we reach them better? How can we reach them more effectively? What can we do? Because I want these to be tangible things maybe we can take this as a group and actually just execute with. So as you can tell, and I'll just be blunt, elephant in the room, but like, hey, we need to grow with like reaching girls. We need to grow with reaching, in my opinion, college students. No offense to all the career, but we're starting to traject towards more of the career side, and I want to keep at least a balance or continue being effective in college ministry as well. So we always have a lot of, even if you're joining us, you can think through this with us, but like we always have room to grow. We always have room to progress, and I don't ever want to sit back and think that, hey, we have it all together. You can see, like tonight, for example, like, hey, let's figure out a way to take this group right here and find tangible ways to reach, and let's go execute. And I think that'd be profitable. So let's think through this for a little bit. I'll give you about, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 minutes to think through of like, hey, how can we go and effectively reach college and career students that are around us? This could go as far as to say like, hey, here's some places we could go that would be really effective to reach them. Or, hey, here is like an example of an event that maybe we can create to like invite them to. Like, I'm talking about like really tangible ways. Or you're saying like, hey, like my friends really would like love to have a meal. Like it's easy to book connections over like, hey, meet me on campus. We'll go meet with this friend and we'll go have a meal together. Like those kind of things. That's what I'm looking for. All right. So think through that for about 4 or 5 minutes in a group. If you're joining us online, think through that as well. We'll come back together and we'll kind of discuss that real briefly, and then we'll kind of start in this. Okay. Sound good? All right. It's 4 or 5 minutes now. All right, so let's think on the college side first. Let's think through the college side first. Let me ask you, was your discussions mixture of both, or was it geared towards one or the other? Geared towards college? Okay, let's do that then. So what college? Let's pretend that I don't know anything, okay? And I'm legit asking you the question. What would be the answers? I gave you the question already.
All right. So, I mean, me and Jordan were talking. It was just the fact of like we actually go to a campus. Whether we take a Thursday off or multiple Thursdays off, we actually go to the campus like at High Point somewhere, and either set up a tent or hang out gospel tracks. We had the gospel cube,
Right.
so we go around with those. We talk to people about the gospel and whatnot. I
Yeah.
mean, there's bound to be believers there. Yeah, you're probably going to face like opposition with some, but you're actually there on the campus.
Yeah.
You're getting to interact with the people. And then once you do and you find out who those people are that believe and may not have a church or are looking for a new church, something like that, then you continue engaging. Then whatever like club or organization whatever they're a part of, then that's your entry into
Okay.
that whole realm of
Yeah. Right.
Like the tent would draw attention, so you kind of get it started and get it familiar.
Yeah.
People that can.
For sure.
because then it would help like other people who decide to come
Yeah.
from wherever we go. You know what I mean? Because then they know somebody possibly who's coming here already, and that's their entry point here. Whereas same for us over there, wherever.
Okay. That sounds good. I think I like the idea of taking a Thursday or 2 or 5 or 10. I'm just kidding. But like taking a few Thursdays and just saying, hey, let's just go like either one night, hey, let's all go to High Point University, or like, hey, like this week, let's divide up. And because I always say the community college is a little different because you're not really going to catch them at this time. But the universities, this is it's opportunity time. Yeah. Hey, I've had the one idea that I had one time, and well, if you sponsor it, no, I'm just kidding. But I had the idea. I'm totally joking, by the way, those of you who are watching. But of us like taking part of either our budget or taking part of like some giving that people have given to the group, and saying like, hey, like I'm gonna give like let's say I gave like each of you like $15, $20. Let's say $20, and you would like go and just buy dinner for somebody that you've like met on campus, and like you like say like, hey, love to get some coffee with you, love to catch dinner, and like just go have a conversation, and it's covered for both of you. And that way you have no, I mean you can't go to like, I mean unless you want to stretch it, and pay for tip, then you could like go to Chili's, like get the 3 for $10 or whatever. But you're obviously gonna keep it minimum to like a Chick-fil-A style, something like that. But it's at least an opportunity to maybe provide something for them and also be able to have a conversation. Statistically speaking, just throw this out there, I don't know anything, right? But I'm pretending, but at the same time, in this moment, I'm not. It's somewhere upwards of like 80% of people would attend something of the church if you just invited them. So if we just start with an invitation, that's the church. No offense to the church, and I'm not meaning this offensively at all, and it's going to sound wrong, but like that probably goes to 100% if you invite them to Chick-fil-A. Just being dead honest with you. Yeah, and so like if you end up with like, hey, like you've met somebody, built a contact, built a relationship. One of my best friends in college, and I still actually, it's our TWR that we sponsor, because his name's Clay. How Clay and I met at Carolina was we noticed about halfway through the semester that, hey, we kind of take 2 classes together and we sit somewhere similar. We had 150 people in the class of both of them. But we kind of sit near each other, and it's like, hey, like, you seem like you like sport. Like, that's like our conversation started off with like sports. It was like he overheard me talking about baseball, so he came to start a conversation about baseball. And we just kind of and he developed into a roommate, a ministry partner. We went overseas together. We did an internship together, and now we're sponsoring him, and like still maintain a great friendship. All because we're sitting in geology class, and we're like, hey, we've seen each other a few times. Like, we might as well get to know each other, right? Do what? You like rocks? Man, that midterm was awful. But I'm not. That's a conversation for another day. All right, what else?
Another thing with like college students is like sometimes after church like we would go cards for like we would see college students sometimes like by themselves like a
Hmm.
few of them there like if they're by themselves maybe they're trying to get spot time like trying to meet like you said go out and try to more than likely they already
Yeah, yeah, for sure. This is a one of those moments where I don't know what I'm talking about, but I do know what I'm talking about at some level, I guess. But and I'm just joking aside. One thing I would challenge you to, I did this in. This is kind of fleshing that out. I think that point's good. I think we like a way to execute maybe is like if you know Panera's like that, then obviously go to Panera. I would sit there and I would try like give it some time. So like for example, maybe go to Panera every I don't know, let's say Tuesday night at 7 o'clock, and just see like go for like 3 weeks in a row every Tuesday at 7 o'clock and see what happens. 'Cause I can tell you this: when I did an internship at Summit Church in Durham, um, we would go every Monday, Wednesday, Friday to Bojangles for breakfast in the morning at about 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning. And you know what we saw every Monday, Wednesday, Friday? The same group of older men meeting together, discussing the Bible together. You know what we also saw is the same other people. Like it was like, man, we all got to know each other by name. And it's kind of crazy. You walk in, they know your order, and then everybody knows your name. They ask you how you're doing. They ask how the internship's going, stuff like that. All because we just chose the same time, the same days each and every week. The consistency there. So that's another example, and kind of goes along with that. But I think just finding a place like that is huge. And honestly, food is just an easy one, right? What else?
Kind of off of earlier, but if we had the capacity,
Rides?
yeah,
Okay.
like so they're so close to it, already an opportunity.
So are you saying like, hey, we'll offer a ride to bring you from HPU to our church? Or are you saying like, hey, if you're trying to go somewhere from HPU, like an Uber style for Oatview van kind of?
It's like from there to here.
Okay, I got you. I didn't mean that like bad. I just was like trying to make sure. I didn't know if we were like trying to make Oatview Uber, and that'd be kind of creative though, you know? That's true. Maybe someone else would go to like Georgia or something, probably.
Felipe's got to drive everywhere though.
But that was just off of their
Yeah,
partnering. That'd be another. Got the capacity.
yeah. Anything else? That's good.
Talked about
Okay. Okay. Sounds good.
doing like
Yeah.
have a lot of people come on Sunday.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know what that would look like.
Right.
I don't know if it looks like having talk for people.
Yeah. Right. For sure. Well, I'll see what I'm about to say in a second. Is there anything from the career side? I feel like this will be harder. Is there anything from the career side?
Like how we others have the same whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
College side, preaching
think that's good. One thing that somebody kind of mentioned, and I think might be a good idea. This might sound awkward at first and kind of maybe sort of exclusive, but hear me out for a second. Is almost doing like specific events for specific things. So like having some events be strategic for inviting people to, and then having other events that are like, hey, the group that's here normally, let's meet. This could be for us. I'll give you a quick example. A Rockers baseball game is not going to be it. You might think it at first, but it's not going to be that great for interaction. It's just not. Just because of how you're sitting and like it's just not as. But a cookout, like there's a lot of mingling. There's cornhole typically. You got stuff like that. Like hey, you can kind of go interact with. Whereas just that some atmospheres are harder, but like Rockers would be great for like our group, and then cookout could be like great for like inviting people to. Yeah, very true. Yeah,
Well, speaking of sports, they're having that. They're already having that.
yeah. We're going to try to enter that next year,
Well, I was gonna say, like, if that wasn't already
next
started,
time, next year, whatever it is.
I forgot it had already started.
Yeah,
But I mean, that's like a great opportunity
yeah,
to.
it is. I've been thinking because it's expensive, but if we kind of put some money together and maybe figure out some ways to finagle around, we can. I'm willing to put money to something that's worth an investment. I've always felt that way. I don't want to waste anybody's resources or time. And I think sometimes we've made wrong. We're always going to make wrong decisions at times. We all do. And so there's times we've had to learn from things. But in that, like, hey, like if you can go, if I'm not mistaken, I know they do different ones, but there's one that actually is like purely like college and career age people. Like you have to be within a certain age range. And if that's the case, like how easy is it to like sign up and go play kickball against the same age people that like you do life with basically. So that's right. That's right. Dude, it's like the Southern Baptist way of solving all issues. Food, right?
From the South in general, you know, we got food and hospitality.
That's true.
Come on.
That's true.
But it's hard to be mad at somebody.
Yeah, it is.
Something I thought about too. Be more live, like start posting,
Mm-hmm.
post about it. Post it. They have events.
Yeah.
Almost like what we flyer.
Yeah.
Post it. Message me so well.
Yeah.
Like if we post something here on the week.
Yeah. Yeah. That's going off of that, and then we'll kind of jump into our study for a little bit. But I think, first of all these are helpful. And I think it's helpful for you also to think through and for me to think through. Sometimes brainstorming isn't something that's new under the sun. Sometimes it's just sparking. It's literally just creating a little spark of like, hey man, there's been times where I've sat in a room and I've heard the same thing for the 1000th time, but for whatever reason, that 1000th time started something for me. And sometimes that's just what we need when we consider things together. My time show, it's been 2,000 plus years. So if I think about that, there's probably not many things that happen now that have never happened before, except for like any sort of level of advancement, those kind of things. But point being, there's a few things. One, it's going to start with us. And it's not primarily going to be in this room. It's going to be primarily of like having conversations out of this room and engaging elsewhere. I just told you I'll go a statistic that's from Lifeway on people's response of invitation. I'm going to tell you, you're probably going to get rejected at some point. So just keep going. I feel like it's kind of like dating in some sense of like, I've been rejected dating before, so like, you know, the goal is there's probably gonna be somebody. So like, let's keep going. Let's keep going. There's no point to you don't give up. But in the same sense, like find these tangible ways. But I'm gonna tell you something that's not been mentioned and wouldn't have been mentioned in this context. But I think is be good for us is becoming an easy talker. And that's not an introvert extrovert thing. That's not a hey, I'm a better talker than you thing. Somebody, I'm just being honest with you. Somebody who's pleasant to talk to, listens, just basics. Listens with eyes and ears, engages, talks. You know, is very attentive and engaging in the conversation. I mean, those small things goes a long way when it comes to really building connections with people. So, you know, like when you're at campus and you meet somebody, man, just keep saying their name over and over in your head and learn something new every single week. That's what I would try to do when I was at Carolina was like, hey, like, okay, I met you, Clay. Now, like, next week I'm going to ask you, like, something different. Now, try to remember that. So, like, he got the Yankees originally. So, it's like, I would just, like, tell myself, so, like, the next week I come back, I'll be like, bro, did you see the Yankees game this week? I hate the Yankees, right? So, like, I had no interest in anything good about the Yankees. But I would, like, try to find a way to, it was build a connection. But also having a fluidity when it comes to the gospel and your testimony. Because here's what I mean by that, especially from a college standpoint and really a career standpoint too. But if somebody asks you a question, can you answer? And I'm not talking like, why does God allow suffering and you have to answer it in 2 seconds? Like, we're not talking about that kind of answering. But like, if they ask a question like that, is there a response you could give that you feel good with, that honors the Lord and would actually promote the gospel well? It's not has to be like scary, right? But in the same token, conversations in general with strangers or somebody new is daunting in itself. Now engaging them with something even further, which is a very deep and life-changing subject in person, as we would say, is huge. So being able to do that. So I'm introduced to this now because we're gonna have, you know, this summer is gonna be a lot of opportunities for some of these things. So a lot of opportunities for us to engage people we're already familiar with. But come August, we're gonna do our best to start engaging people that A, we're already familiar with, and B, also we're just gonna meet people. And even this summer, try to do that. But you know, really we're not too late, but it's late in the game for this semester. So like we'll start afresh. We'll plan now, start afresh in August. But I kind of wanted to just have a quick conversation, just turning a little bit longer conversation, but just kind of thinking through and engaging. Hey, how can we grow in this? Because here's what I don't like. And you look around. I mean, when you engage this subject, every church struggles with it. But transfer growth is good, but it shouldn't be the end. And transfer growth means that, like, in this context, is like, hey, you went from kids ministry to youth ministry to college ministry, and now you go from college and career into the next level. That's transferring. You're just transferring within the same system. So people here at Oakview, they just climb up the ladder, so to speak. You know, the problem with transfer growth is that what happens if nobody transfers? What if nobody transfers? So this year, for example, a high school ministry, there are, as far as who comes to church, out of the like 6 or 7 of them who's like consistent, there's one. And that's my sister-in-law. And she's going to App. And so the frequency of her being here is less because she's not going to be physically here. She's going to be 2 hours away. So my point with that is that you can't rely upon that every year. But we also want to be good stewards of what God's given us. And God's called us to go. God's called us to reach. And this is the most mobile time of your life. This is the most I'm going to be honest with you, easy time to reach people in your life. You might not think it now. Trust me, I didn't think when I was your age either. I'm not saying that to feel old. I'm just saying that, like, it goes by quick. And all of a sudden, and it's no offense at all. I love the life I have. But you end up with a wife and you end up with a kid. It's like Jordan asked me earlier, how's it been going? And I said, Judah and church. I mean, that's basically been like my week, And Kayla, you too, but, she kind of joke about her. But overall, what's up, Garrett? But overall, as life changes, I hate this word, you're only going to get more busy. You're going to get more tied up. You're going to have more responsibility. So the amount of free time that you end up having shrinks incredibly. And that's not to discourage you. That just means that we have to organize our schedule better and find opportunities that we might not have thought of before. So like Kyle was saying earlier, hey, I'm going to eat. So why not go eat at the same place at the same time for a few weeks in a row and maybe try to see, hey, can I engage a student here? That's a great idea. You got to eat, and you're going to go out somewhere anyway, so why not do it tangibly every week? Or, you're at workplace, hey, we have a cookout this week. Man, there's no harm in asking somebody to cook out. If they say no, whatever. Well, yeah, I mean, you're missing on the Blackstone, But we're going to continue to grow in this. We're going to continue to have conversations about this. And it's not about a numbers game. For me, it's just about, hey, I've really understood, and I think this is what we're going to talk about in a second, but we need to be good stewards of what God's given us. And God's not placed us here to be idle and to sit and to rest and to receive and never go and give. And our lives will be tangible. And, we need to create change, and the change can start in this room. The change can start in this group. And for us to go and make disciples, go and reach people, go and love people. And I think that'd be huge. And I think that's our next step as a group. We've kind of built a good core overall. Most weeks we have the same around 20 people in here. And that's grown. Now it's time to hey, what can we do? Well, God's placed us with campuses and workplaces that need the gospel and need Jesus. And so the question is, are we going to be willing to actually step in those that God's given us and speak, share, and reach? And so that's going to be kind of our sort of goal is evangelism and outreach. That's where we're headed. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and open to Philippians chapter 2. I know for those of us joining, you probably didn't get to hear a whole lot of that because I didn't have a microphone set for our students answering, but they had a lot of great answers. It was great feedback for us to kind of think through. Thank you for thinking through that with us as well. The title of the message tonight is The Forensics of Faith, and I'll kind of touch on that in a moment. And I'm actually not going to read all the way through like I usually do in Philippians 2, so we're just going to kind of just jump in together, all right? If that's okay with you as well. But the forensics of faith. When I think of forensics, I'm watching a show right now that I'm hooked on. I probably would make Samuel mad, not Dakota because he understands. I'll probably make Samuel mad because I don't play Madden online with them enough. And I actually watch the show kind of more right now on my free time. It's called Blind Spot, and Dakota knows this because I mentioned Blind Spot before. It's a cleaner show than I've thought it would be, in a sense that most shows now are just filled with junk. And so it's been actually kind of somewhat refreshing to be able to watch something that is engaging but not as filthy. But in Blind Spot, it's all about they work for the FBI. This girl is filled with tattoos, and they're trying to solve all these tattoos, and so they're working together as the FBI to solve and they're basically solving all these crimes by building all these connections. And I'm not going to say any more than that. So within that, though, you have to have an investigation. So you see these tattoos, and you kind of build upon one another, and then you utilize these specific things, whatever it may be in that specific case, to build upon one another so that you can answer. So you can provide an answer in the end. Forensics is all about providing a substantive answer. Word tie. a substantive, I can't say the word, I'm going to skip the word, a good and solid reason, a good and solid solution, a good and solid answer. That's the end goal of all forensics, is to utilize certain things to come together and to solve. When we think about this, the forensics of faith, you're going to see tonight, as we look through, our main focus is going to be 12 through 18, and we'll touch briefly on 19 through 30. But our 12 through 18, you're going to see some of these things that I think they build upon one another to kind of coalesce into a framework for us that says the solution, says the answer, says what it should be. And so within that, the main idea for our time together is this: work out with reverence and reason. You're going to see here in a moment, he's going to say, work out. Right? This is not like Arnold Schwarzenegger and like trying to like get buff, but like this is working out within our salvation. But we do so with both reverence and reason. And so we'll touch on both of those in a moment and kind of discuss those further. But we have 3 points. These points are this: personal responsibility, personal character, and personal joy. Personal responsibility, personal character, and personal joy. So let's first look at the personal responsibility. You see in verse 12, you see this: so then, my beloved, just as you have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who is at work in you, both to will and to work for his good pleasure. So let's kind of touch on that for a second. It says, so then. And remember, so then will be very similar, to like the word therefore. And so that means that so then would kind of connect us back to what we just learned last week. We looked at the Christ's humility in chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. We looked at that example. We sang about it. We worshiped together. But the whole point was that it ended, right, with not only that Christ displayed such humility by taking on the cross, by dying that death for us, but also that one day, that at the name of Jesus, the name that is above every name, that every tongue will confess, every knee is going to bow, that he's Lord, and to the glory of God the Father. And so, from that, so then, because of this, because of all this, my beloved, just as you have always obeyed. Just as you've always obeyed. Now, that's already an issue for us, whether we like to think of it that way or not. But the issue here is, what does obedience look like? And pragmatically, we kind of think through of obedience become more of like law abiding. And we like to somewhat teach that pretty often. And so the legalistic minded person would say, well, obedience looks like fulfilling the law, following the rules, essentially. The grace-filled person would probably look at it more as you're always in obedience to something. What is it? So what you put your heart into, what you are around, invest in, is what you end up obeying. Because a graceful person would also understand, hey, like I've been filled with grace because of what Jesus has done. And so they both have right perspectives in some essence, and sometimes can be wrong in different ways. Paul here, when he talks about obedience, and he says, just as you have always obeyed, the reason why the word always is there and have is there is pretty important, but it's pretty self-explanatory. And here's the reason why. For Paul, there is no separation from salvation and obedience. There's not a separation. So when he would think of us as, hey, that moment that you were saved. So think back to that moment. When you were saved, that you would automatically begin, because of the Spirit's work inside of you and because of being filled with the Spirit, that there'd be a work that's beginning in you that is a transformative work. But it is one of which that because of what God has done for you, that your heart changes and now you walk in obedience. It's like I've told you plenty of times before. If you get a big gift in your life, if somebody said, hey, your student loan debt, I'm going to solve it for you. I'm going to pay it off for you. Right? Some of us would go Pentecostal and charismatic very quickly. within the church if somebody said, hey, I'm going to pay off your student loans. Now, here's the thing, though. Like I've always said this as an example. If somebody did that, it'd be great, but your relationship changes with them forever. You end up, no matter what, changing your relationship with them, and you want to do good to them. You want to help them. You want to help serve them. You want to respond out of the gift that's been given to you. But you notice something about it? When you actually think about it intrinsically, you don't do it out of obligation. You don't do it out of obligation. So I wrote this down. Obedience is not merely an obligation, but rather an overflow of reverence. It's not an obligation, but and I'm going to use it, in reality, it's an overflow of reverence. You see, in some ways, reverence can be, although I think it's higher than this, it can be linked to respect of some matter. And, you know, my love for my wife, and my serving of her, my helping of her, my leading of her, I mean, all the things about her, if you were to boil it down and say that your love is out of obligation, then I think you've got a twisted and distorted view of love. There's got to be something deeper than that there. We don't do things out of obligation for people we truly love. Is there obligation there? Yes. I have an obligation as a husband by God to what? And there's certain things that have to be followed through. But I don't then have to turn and only love because of an obligation. I don't need to go home tonight and do the dishes only because and find some verse or some law. No. There's nothing beyond that. That's what I'm touching on, and that's what Paul's kind of reaching to. Is he's saying, hey, look, when it comes to your salvation, salvation doesn't sit. Salvation doesn't rest. It's not a gift. I mean, you've had these gifts before, right? These gifts that you receive, and you either fake it till you make it, or you just kind of like think it's gonna be awesome, but you just kind of have a moment and you enjoy that gift for that brief moment, and then 3 years from then, as you're cleaning out, you're like, man, I ain't never used this gift. I ain't never touched this shirt. I've never touched this movie. I've never done, those kind of gifts. That you don't, that's not what salvation is like. That's not the type of gift salvation is. It's not to merely sit. It's actually to be engaging. It's supposed to force. It's supposed to be active. It's supposed to be involved. It's supposed to continue. If you look at like a lot of examples from the cross, the burial, and the resurrection, you see a lot of tenses in Greek that ultimately would show you that it's both past, present, and future. And a lot of them. Tetelestai, it is finished. We cry that out loud every single Easter and every time we talk about the cross, but it's past, present, and future, which is the biggest, like, crazy thought to me, that a current action would be both past, present, and future. But that's what it is. So here, he's saying, just as you have always obeyed, he's directly linked to that, hey, because you obey out of salvation, because, hey, you follow Jesus now. To follow him, you deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow him. This means you've given up your life, and you follow him. So then, therefore, because of that gift and the salvation, because of eternal life, you obey. But sadly enough, we don't really obey that often. But he says that, hey, it's not only in his presence only, but how much more in my absence. I love that. And I think we probably gloss over that a lot in Philippians, especially when we study it together. But I don't want you to gloss over that. He says that, I've been working when I was there, but it's even growing more when I'm not there. One of the greatest joys of a leader is that they don't have to be present to see flourishing. They don't have to be present for that. That it just continues. And you know what the greatest testimony of a good leader is that they're not needed anymore. If you need, for example, we joke about it. I mean, the what would Jesus do kind of mentality comes from this framework. The framework of, hey, if Jesus was around you in your moments, would you live differently? And so that question mark, that kind of thought process comes from this kind of heart. It It comes from a place of, hey, would you act differently because Jesus is present? And Paul here is saying, hey, look, you might have acted well in front of me, but man, you have flourished even away from me. Much, much more. And what's awesome about that is that the people, and this is what's different, and this is why I think the college and career landscape, the shift begins to happen. It's not mommy and daddy's faith anymore. It's tangible. You know, up until 18, if you had parents who wanted to bring you to church, once you become an adult, it's kind of like, hey, it's on you. You might have parents that said, hey, I mean, you probably heard this before, like, if you're under my roof, you're going to church with us. But at some point, right, that changes. So the question becomes is, what is it for you? And so you see a lot of college students who, I mean, you go to your campuses and places and you'll hear it all the time that they were believers, they say, or that they went to church and all this, but then when they got to college, it just dissipated. And yeah, I think that issue there is really what is kind of hitting home here, which is that you shouldn't need mom and dad anymore. You shouldn't need the pastor around you. You shouldn't need, at some point, you take hold of what God's called you to and you move forward. You take hold. You live the life that God has called you. You live, as Ephesians 4 says, as Philippians says, you live your life worthy of the calling in which you've been called. And so within that, then, that means that you flourish no matter who's around. If they're around, great. If they're not, hey, we find new people, we keep going. And Paul, I'm telling you, the greatest joy, like, here's what it would be. It would be like as if I just went to somewhere else for like 2 years. And I check back in on you guys, and it's like, hey, we're growing. Hey, we're reaching people. Hey, we're serving, we're loving, we're ministering. You know what joy that would bring is because, like, hey, it's never about me up here. It's never about Steve on Sundays. It's never about Robert and youth. It's never about Josh and kids. It's never about any of us. It's about Jesus. And he's saying, hey, I see that in you. These people in the culture at this time were people who followed leaders. They followed idols. They followed names. That's why right before this, he says, so the name that is above every name, because he's challenging that notion already of like, hey, there is somebody much greater than who you see around you. And so Paul, somebody who's planted this church, who they would have looked up to, is saying, hey, look, it's past me. It's beyond me. And so when it comes to your life, continue. Continue. But what? Work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Work out. Now, like I said a while ago, this is not get your dumbbells, get out your weight plates and barbells and, doing some squats or something. This is not what we're talking about here. But if you were to take some truth of working out, there's a level of commitment, there's a level of determination, there's a level of preparedness, there's a level of organization, carving out time, there's a level of heart, motivation, and then what? There's a desire for progress. I've never known somebody in my life who goes and works out to keep being the same person. I mean, have you ever thought about that? Like, working out in its own right and on its own design is always designed in progress, never stalling. So, just be honest with you for a second. Let's say we had some fitness stuff up here. Let's say we committed ourselves to a month of every day. We provided it. We were doing it together. We get to the end of the month. How would you feel if you remained the same or got worse? I mean, how would you feel if everything was prepared for you, everything was provided for you, the only thing that had to matter was that you actually took action, that I took action, and you see progress? If that's all that was necessary in a correct mindset, what would happen if you arrived at the end and there was no progress or you actually got worse? Here's the only way that happens. You didn't work out. That's the only way that happens. I've never known somebody, and this is my personal opinion, I've never known somebody who, let's say, like, for example, there's a lady walking around the parking lot right now. Okay, let's say she could walk to start, 50 spaces. I've never known somebody who walks every single day and they walk 50 spaces that 2 weeks from then they can't walk like 100 spaces. I've never known somebody who actually stays in the same 50 spaces for the rest of their life, working out. They keep going. Part of working out here, and that's what I'm saying, kind of taking some of that truth, is that there is no option for stalling, being idle. There's no option for, hey, we just kind of sit. We just kind of wait. We kind of just let it happen. No, what Paul is saying is a part of this linking of salvation and obedience means you take hold of what God's given you and you actually prepare, you actually invest, and you actually go in progress. It's just like I've told Kayla before. I mean, like, I'll give you a good example, right? I gave up sweets for Lent. You know how much weight I lost? You take a guess? 0. Why? Because I didn't work out, and I didn't change anything else either. I just kind of left it the same. So what was the point of giving up sweets? You know what I'm saying? I mean, in some sense, you kind of sit there and think, like, man, like, maybe I could have had a sweet and kind of bounced it back out. But, like, joking aside, the problem was me, of the goal that I wanted, that I didn't fulfill. God has called us to run the race of faith. And to do so how? With perseverance, which Paul speaks of here in Philippians. But also you run to win. You run to win. That's why we joked about on Sunday, right? About when we play kickball in the View, right? Like, there is no there's no fiber in my being that doesn't want to win. I don't care if we're playing tic-tac-toe. I don't care if we're playing Villainous. I don't care if we're playing foosball, Madden, Ultimate Frisbee, whatever you want to create and think of. I want to win. And in the Christian life, that should be your desire. Running the race to win. You know how you run the race to win? You do what they're doing out there right now. You keep moving. You keep finding ways to utilize and to progress. And Paul is saying, hey, this is what I'm seeing in you. And so you're saying, hey, when you work out that salvation with fear and trembling. You know how another way that you progress is you do so out of reverence. Do so out of reverence. That's what, in perspective, fear and trembling. And there's only one, as far as true element of reverence, there's only one person you and I should revere in that way. And that's Jesus. With fear and trembling, you should never go before a man in fear and trembling. Just my personal opinion here, but you can take it for what it is. You should never go before it. There's no man great enough for that. You might have respect, but when I think of fear and trembling, you know what the first thing that comes to mind is the devil, is the demons. Why? Because that's what they do. They go before God in fear and trembling. They know who he is. They know him by name. And so I think of that. I think of all the power of God. I think of all the omnis, of God. I think of like just how great God is. And so working out your salvation, so not only have salvation, not only have an obedience, but like actually working it out looks like worship. That's what it looks like. And you're seeing what I would argue potentially a heart of worship is here. But Paul has not once said, hey, this is to fulfill the law. This is to do it out of your duty. No. Paul is basically saying here that this is an overflow because of that gift that's been given to you. And you do it because you want to. You desire to. There's a part of a love for you here. There's a part of a understanding of grace and mercy here. There's a part of understanding of, hey, you have been given life out of darkness. You've been given life out of death. And so within that, it is what? God who is at work in you. The God of this universe is at work in you currently. Has been and will continue to. Can you think about that for a second? You know, like if you think about your one desire that you want to, like in, let's say 5 years. Like what job you want to have, or like maybe you're thinking of your career path in college, whatever it may be. Alex and I were just talking a while ago, right? Which one? Game design. Okay. Now let me just give you an example. All right, you know, it'd be awesome for me as like a pastor. Can you imagine if I got in a room and I just got to pick the brains of the likes of like John MacArthur, John Piper, J.D. Greer. You know, you can keep David Platt. You can keep naming like whoever you want to name. I'd probably go old school. I'd probably go to like D.A. Carson, John Owen. Probably go to Spurgeon. You know, I'd go to Luther. I mean, can you imagine like if you just got in a room with like 15 or 20 of them, and you just got to spend time with just listening and them investing in you. You know what's fascinating about that? And then now you think about that in your framework, right? Like game design. I'm not good with this, but I think through like people like would be great in game design. And you're in the room with all of them. I mean, what kind of questions would you ask, you know? Or like what kind of things would you work through or think through? You would just sit there as a sponge. Let me soak in all of this. And then what would you do? Well, you'd ultimately want to be squeezed out. In the sense that you'd want to actually like utilize it. It's useless if it just sits. It's useless if you just don't ever move. It's useless if you don't take it in and keep going. The thing that's awesome about that is that's an earthly perspective that then brings to the fact that the God of the universe works in you. Out of all people, he chooses us. Right? Filthy rags, as we would say. But he loves you so much that he doesn't just drop a gift on you and disappear. He doesn't leave you or forsake you. No, he's present. He's active. He's within you. He works in you. God of the universe. God of heaven and earth. The God you worship loves you that much that he is still working in you. When you mess up, he's still refining you. He's still sharpening you, sanctifying you. He doesn't give up on you. He chases you. He pursues you. That God works in you. Now think about this. Not only does he work in you, but think about like all like the equipping of God. Like almost think about him as like your trainer. Like if I was sitting here and I was like wanting to get like strong, and I had like the world-renowned trainer, I'd be like, man, like I'm about to I get swole, as people would say, you know. But like if you had God, and he's equipping you, he's training you, and he's working in you, then here's the question that we would have. If God's doing that, then wouldn't we look like progress? Wouldn't we look like we're growing? Wouldn't we look like that there's an evolving, there's a continuation, there's like a unfolding, so to speak, of that work? Both to will and to work for his good pleasure. Now that's hard. His good pleasure. Not yours. Now, as a believer, your heart now should align and have joy in his pleasure. But from a fleshly perspective, it's a battle. Because it's not about us anymore. Remember, you denied yourself, you took up your cross, and you followed him. But there's joy that is there. There's joy that is there. And I wrote this down. Rotten apples are no good for nourishment. I don't know if you ever had a rotten apple before. I don't know if you would really want to. But it's about useless at that point. it's not tasty. The nourishment level and factor is quite different. A rotten apple is not good for it. So why would we think that, physically speaking, but not spiritually speaking? The question I had for myself when I was reading that is, am I the rotten apple? Like in my life right now. Right? Like think about this. For an apple to be rotten, it took a farmer to take care, people to help grow. I'm thinking about crops, right? And they grow, they invest, and it produces. So something that's produced, but you know what happened? It was never utilized within its time frame. And what happened to it? It became useless. What a shame it would be to end our lives, and we look back and we say, man, we're like that rotten apple. We're like a rotten apple. We had a time frame, we were given, we were poured into, we were invested in, it was to create fruit, and we should have grown and provided nourishment. Instead, man, we were rotten. It's for his good pleasure. And so from this, then we get to the most famous probably of this selection, and do all things what? With grumbling and, no, I'm just kidding. Doesn't say that, does it? Without grumbling or disputing. Man, what two words those are. You know, this is not, grumbling may be, I think that's a character and a heart posture that's interesting. Disputing, though, I don't want you to take that so literal. Let me, if you were to tell me, for example, that abortion's okay. But do all things without grumbling or disputing. So I shouldn't dispute it. No, that's a moment where we understand Scripture and what we see, what we believe in. So my point with that is, don't take that so literal as like, hey, you never dispute. But he's talking about here, he's jumping now to about that from the personal responsibility to now the personal character. The character. And I don't know about you, but I can't stand to be around somebody who they're just argumentative. They debate a lot. And they're basically full of themselves at that point. That's been me at times. So don't, some of you are probably like, man, I remember that time that we just argue, But, in all seriousness, nobody likes to be around that person. Nobody. You can ask the world, you can ask the church, nobody. But what a terrible testimony and example of the love of Christ and the gift of salvation for your life and my life to be marked by grumbling and disputing. And you know what it ends up saying in the end? That you're more willing to be right and heard than you are to love and to serve. Somebody who likes to dispute and argue and grumble. When I think of grumbling, I just think of somebody who wants their voice heard. You just want to insert your opinion. You just want to insert your thoughts. You're just always persistent in all the wrong places. And then disputing, you show up to the party to argue. I mean, they might be right, but you still gonna argue with them, Those kind of moments. But I mean, the heart and the character of a believer should not be in this situation of that kind of posture. And he says, do all things without this so that. So it means that your linking of being blameless, your linking of being pure, is that you were to live a life of integrity. You were to live a life that is what? True to God. That is a life that is a character and a posture that reflects who God is. Let me give you a quick example. If you look throughout Scripture, do you think Jesus disagreed with a lot of people he ministered to? And it's not, have no hesitation. Yes. Was Jesus a grumbler and a disputer? And the answer is then no. In this context, right? So how did he do both? See, that's what we like to typically ask. It's like, well, if we don't grumble or we can't dispute, then what do we do? But we just said that Jesus did disagree with people. That Jesus was in opposition at times with people. But he's not marked by grumbling and disputing. And so that shows you that inherently behind it is that the response kind of comes from the character. And in that is important to consider. It's important to consider. Don't jump ahead of investing in your character. If I can encourage you in that, man, spend a season now and invest in that. Pour into that. Tap into that. And I know I'm going along, but we're going to end it here in a second. More like 5 minutes. But if you spend no time in this, you spend no time in prayer, then your character's not getting developed. I'm just telling you. I'm just being honest with you. Let me ask you this question. You can think of this on your own. When you get around people who look and live like Jesus, they don't look like people who have let the weights and all the ways of working out sit. They look like people, and you'd ask them, and they've been in the Word. They've been in time with the Lord. They've listened. They've prayed. They've been saturated with the Spirit. They've spent time thinking in preparation and in depth. But here's the thing. Character also separates us from the world. He says that here, so that you may be what? Blameless and innocent, children of God, and then above reproach in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation. So let me solve something for you here real quick. The world around you is crooked and perverse. Scripture is very clear. I don't have to make it up. It's right here. It says crooked and perverse in the midst of a. So don't think that like I cannot stand when somebody says, "Oh, my go back about generations, talk about which generation is better." It grammatically speaking, the way it reads suggests that every single generation's like this. And I'm just trying to use my English that I learned. I'm terrible at it, but I'm just using it and reading how it says. And it says, "You're to be children of God above reproach in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation." So this scripture keeps speaking to people. That means that those people are in the midst of what? A crooked and perverse generation. So the world around you is going to pull you down. It's going to try to weigh you. It's going to try to sway you. But he's saying this, hey, to be blameless, to be innocent, to be above reproach, to stand out in integrity. And he says this, in that crooked and perverse generation, you're going to look like lights in the world. Well, hey, here's the thing. Last time I checked, you don't look like a light if you're in darkness. What does darkness match with darkness? That's just double darkness. That's just all it is. Or, if we were to turn all these lights out, right? And I had this light on, right? Let's just say we did. And I just do this. Still a light, right? But it's just kind of covered. That's not the intent here. What I'm asking you is this. What is this in your life? What is in your life right now that when God's calling you to be a light in this crooked and perverse generation to stand apart, what is it that's taking that cover? Remember when as a kid you sang the song, "Hide it under a bushel, no, I'm going to let it shine"? I mean, what is it? And we have them. We have these issues. We have these things that block us. They need to be attacked with a tenacity and a passion of disdain. Because here's the problem. The church right now, by and large, we like to think that it looks like this room filled with brightness. When in actuality, a lot of times we have shades and dimmers on. And you know what ends up happening? We blend in. There's not a standing apart. And so he says, you hold fast to the word of life. We know that this is Jesus. You hold fast to him. If you hold fast to something, I feel like you don't want to let it go. It's not only quickened in response, but it's also hastened in amount of time too. It's a continue. But what? So that in the day of Christ I will have reason to glory, because I did not run in vain or toil in vain. He's sitting there saying, hey, as a leader, man, if you look like lights in the world, if you do things without grumbling or disputing, if you look blameless and innocent in this crooked and perverse generation, then the work that I've done is not in vain. And what he's saying here is, hey, we're to be good stewards of not only what God has done for us, but how people have invested in us. You know what would be a shame is if, like, let's just use an example. If I told Dakota, I don't have this money, man, I'm sorry, but if I told Dakota, hey, I'm going to pay for your student loans if you do this. Do what? Okay, well, he didn't have any student loans, so I do have that money. But let's just pretend for a brief moment that he did, and I was going to offer to pay him if he fulfilled something. Maybe it's just completing school, right? So if that's the case, and then he doesn't complete school, but I've spent $20,000, then what's happened here? I mean, Grinch's heart comes alive, right? I mean, something's going to happen, because my money's been spent in what? Vain. And here's what vain looks like in that situation. There's no result. There's no growth. There's nothing tangible. The thing about that is that Paul wants to see these people moving. Not because of him, but because of Jesus. We spent quite a bit of time earlier discussing what it looks like to live and to serve, to honor, and to reach for Jesus. But here's the thing. We need to step out of obligation, think through it from an obligation standpoint, and think about it through a reverence standpoint. And you want to know how we can think through that? It's the same question that's always been permeating throughout generation after generation in the 90s kids of what would Jesus do? I can guarantee you that if Jesus was to go with us to school and work tomorrow, that it would have looked different. Physically speaking, I can guarantee it. I mean, can you imagine, just being honest with you, can you imagine you showing up to work? Or well, let's just say, for example, you're on a way to work and somebody cuts you off. You know, typical, like, hey, I'm going to yell at you, you know? Can you imagine like doing that and Jesus is sitting next to you? You know, in some ways I'd be hard-pressed to think that, man, you just unload on the driver in front of you. I mean, there's just something about Jesus being next to you. You'd be kind of like, it's okay. They cut me off, but it's all right. You get to work. I just have a hard time feeling we have sour attitudes at work at that point. I have a hard time thinking that when I come here tomorrow and I go paint the fields for Upward for Saturday, I have a hard time sitting there thinking, oh, man, I got to keep filling these cans back up. I got to keep spraying. I got to follow these. I mean, like, you know, you actually probably would sit there and think, like, I mean, I'd be probably skipping with the sprayer with Jesus next to me, you know, like just kind of having fun with it because, hey, like I would see actual like purpose. Y'all probably want to see that, don't you? Like a nice video of this. Yeah. Hey, you'd fix them though, right? But here's the thing: is that if there is in that place a difference, then ultimately, at the heart of the issue is a difference between obligation and reverence. Obligation looks like what you did when you were in school. You did things to get them done. Reverence looks like I'm going to do them in excellence. There's a big difference there. Obligation looks like, hey, I just want to complete. I just want to finish. I just want to do. Why? Because I have to. Reverence looks like, I'm going to run in joy. I'm going to do this in joy. And I want to do this excellently. I want to do this in a glorifying way. So my challenge for you as we continue on this study, and as we continue on thinking through this, is that we would grow in that perspective. And here's a wording difference. And I'm going to try to start thinking through this differently. I was reading and listening to somebody talk about this, and I think it's huge. As a church, we've preached a lot that people should do this. And you'll hear me still say it, and I'll probably mess up. But it's almost as if like it's just a pounding of like you should. But in some ways, it should just be you can. You know what the switching of those words does? One becomes an obligation, one becomes an invitation. And an invitation just invites you to join in. But we've pounded it a lot. Hey, you should do this. And in some ways, there's truth to that. But I just hope that you and I would collectively know that, hey, there's something more. When you live for Jesus out of an obligation, out of a sense of like a almost have to, then you get burned out. You want to know why? Because your measuring stick is what you've done or didn't do. Your measuring stick is, hey, what was the response I got? Your measuring stick is in the wrong place. But if you do it because of Jesus, out of your love for him, out of devotion, out of the obedience that's spoken of here, out of that salvation, and you do so out of a posture of fear and trembling, of reverence, then you know what it looks like? You don't grumble and dispute. It looks like you stand apart from the world. It looks like that you have invested in things well and you want to live well. And so as I mentioned earlier, I've never known somebody who works out and doesn't progress. When, and I'm going to finish it here, when they work out rightly. I just don't. And here's the thing. It works the same way here when we do our workout with reverence and reason. And so, as we conclude here, hey, you're going to look at verses 19 through 30. To be honest with you, hey, he's talking about, hey, he'd like to send Timothy to them shortly. So, hey, may even be more encouraged. But then he talks about sending Epaphroditus. Epaphroditus, hey, he was ministering. He was moving to different places. And he was giving him his life because he was sick, deeply sick, hurt, afflicted. And he continued to invest. He continued to pour out. He continued to reach and serve. And so you see that here. I thought it necessary in verse 25 to send to you Epaphroditus, my brother and fellow worker and fellow soldier. You see there both, obviously, a familial connotation, both a vocation connotation, and a military connotation. And it shows you kind of the approach that Paul has here when it comes to not only your faith, but living it out. But Epaphroditus was longing for them. He wanted to be with them. And Paul says he sends him eagerly, so that you may rejoice. He may be less concerned. He says he came close to death for the work of Christ, risking his life to complete what was deficient in your service to me. And ultimately he was saying this, hey, God gave Epaphroditus a purpose And even in the risk of life, for the fact that he was sick, afflicted, and even in the risk of all of that, Epaphroditus still moved. He still served. He still was useful. And so the end for us, to conclude there, that's my question for us is, do we honor the investments that have been made in us? That's the question, both by God and by others. Do we take hold of the things that are necessary, that are true? Do we live a life that looks like solid character? It has a foundation of Christ and his word. Is it sand? Is it rock? Sand crumbles, dissipates, moves. Rock, solid, firm, stands. And so, I'm going to pray for us. I hope that this has been helpful in some ways to think through. It's kind of an interesting, out of all the sections in Philippians, this one's kind of an interesting section. But to kind of keep up, verses 19 through 30 are a little different, but that kind of solves 19 through 30 in a nutshell. Next week, we'll kind of be in, obviously, the beginning of chapter 3. But I don't want us to dismiss the truth that's here. So I pray you can continue to consider that with me, and as we go throughout this next week. But I'm going to pray for us. I have just 2 quick announcements, and we'll be dismissed. All right? Father, we just thank you for this time together. We thank you for your love and your grace. And God, just thank you for just the beauty of your gospel, your truth. And so, Father, may it unfold in our lives. May it be of just joy to us to live for you out of reverence, out of devotion, out of obedience, because of the gift of salvation that you've given us. And Lord, I just pray, Lord, if there's anyone wrestling with the faith, God, considering what it looks like to follow you, God, I pray they would come talk to me. They would, Lord, speak to you. God, I just pray that, Lord, that they would come to know you. And Father, I pray those of us who are believers, God, that we would continue on. We would progress. We would run to win the prize that is before us. We do so passionately, boldly, joyfully, out of the reverence and obedience of our hearts. Lord, knowing that you are the name that is above every name. And so, Father, may it be to your glory and to your honor. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.